Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be looking at every single artifact weapon that's coming in Legion, or at the very least every single one that has been data mined. If you want to go to a specific class, then hit up the video description. There will be timecode link thingies to every single class. Lastly, this video ended up being pretty crazy to put together, so if you want to do anything in and around that like button, it'd be pretty cool. Anyway, let's get right into the meat of the content. First up, we've got the Maw of the Damned, and I've got to say, this thing is looking pretty damn vicious. What I really like in terms of the detailing is those little lines of red that are going up inside every single one of the spikes. Now, it doesn't actually look like the biggest weapon ever. The recolors are solid, but maybe a little bit more heft to it would be nice. Still, we haven't actually seen it on a character model. Now next, we've got this other version of the Maw of the Damned. It's essentially the same as the last one. What they've essentially done is just put some more metal in between the different spikes. From what I gather, you get this once you hit level 110. It's kind of like an upgraded visual version of the original Maw of the Damned, and definitely a very nice looking weapon. Next up, we have got this extremely cool version of it. It seems to be made of bone, but the bone's kind of like twisted up. It's a bit hollow looking, so it doesn't maybe look like the most practical weapon. I'd say this thing would shatter in an instant, but absolutely very impressive from an artistic standpoint, as are all of the different color variants. Once again, we've got another very cool one. This definitely looks like more of a scythe, and as you'll probably come to realize in this video, I really like scythes. Lots of very sort of harsh edges, very slicey looking. It looks brutal, and there's a lot of strong color on it as well. This is absolutely another one which is going down very good in my book. Great to see so many color variants as well. That really does mean you're going to have something to go with every transmog. This next one is more of it kind of looks like a mixture of an axe and like a polearm and something else, kind of like a short polearm, I suppose. And again, definitely very cool looking. That Legion-esque version, the green one, might be my favorite. I think that's very cool. And there are one or two Death Knight things which I think might actually work. So next we've got the blades which you're going to be forging out of Frostmourne. You'll be wearing two of these. So this base version it's definitely quite cool. It's a little bit pared down, a little bit small, nothing particularly crazy about it, but it's definitely a very solid rune blade. Now we move on to this next one, which appears to be a more upgraded version of it, and by upgraded, essentially the thing is covered in ice. Well, it's for Frost DK, so that does make a good bit of sense. Very cool though. I think this one's a little bit better than the last one. It's just got more heft to it, I think. Though it is a little bit hard to see some of the runes in the center. Lots of very cool color variants, though some of the warmer ones make a bit less sense to me as a DK weapon. Now this next one is far more large and imposing looking. I don't think it's as cool in some ways, but I really like how if you look at the skull, the spell effect is kind of coming down out of the skull into the tip of the blade. Now this version is a little bit more mundane in that it's not as crazy and glowy, but I can see a lot of people liking it because it is a bit less crazy and glowy. Good sort of sharp cutting edge as well, and some of the outlines around the skull are particularly cool. Next we've got this, which is a little bit more bone looking. It also seems to share some of the spell effects of some of the not Yogg-Saron, the Mist of Pandaria Shah on it. I think it's pretty cool. Next up we've got Unholy. Now this Unholy one definitely looks like more of a traditional Death Knight rune blade in the kind of like vanilla Warcraft 3-ish sense to me. Definitely quite nice, and there's actually some similarities between that version and the Ashbringer. Next, though, we've got this one, which very much looks like Unholy. It just looks like it's dripping with plague. I think an extremely cool weapon. Nice animations, too. Gives it a little bit of visual sparkle and flair. I think that's definitely a very strong choice, though. That red one is particularly evil looking. Next, we've got Apocalypse. So, this is strange. A part of it looks almost organic, but then it also kind of looks like melted rock and then just, like, poured down the blade. I think it's very cool. You've also got these little spell effects on it, which appear to be like glowflies or something. That's quite cool. Next, we've got another version of Apocalypse. This one looks like it's infected with something, and I suppose that does make sense. It's unholy, it's all about plagues and things like that. Overall, a pretty solid weapon, though it's maybe not as good in my book as some of the previous ones. Now, this one is very unique. It's taking the weapon and making it a little bit more sort of scythe-like in its edge. That blue one especially is really doing it for me. I've got to say, this is probably my favorite Unholy one. It just looks unique and different, and hopefully there will be some good mods to go with it. So next up, we've got the Paladin, starting off with Retribution and the Ashbringer. Well, It's the Ashbringer, you pretty much all know what it looks like. That said, seeing it all nice and high res is definitely very nice. It's a very cartoonish, fantasy-ish weapon, and I think that definitely works. It's overall really, really cool looking. Now, this version of Ashbringer is shattered, but held together by some sort of bizarre electricity. I do think it looks quite nice. There's something about it which doesn't feel super Ashbringer-ish though, but certainly it's a very cool variant of the weapon, and perhaps if you had some nice sort of electric animated shoulders, it would look great. Now this next one here is quite similar to the previous version of the Ashbringer. It's just a bit kind of hyped up, if you know what I mean. They've added a little bit more sparkle to it, changed the edge of the blade slightly. It's good, it's more just a slight, I don't want to say improvement because I kind of prefer the other version, but it's the same but with a little bit more. Now this next version, it isn't really doing much for me as far as being a retribution weapon because it doesn't really look like the Ashbringer, it doesn't really look like a paladin weapon. It looks almost more Death Knight-ish. Yeah, you can see the little circle where the Ashbringer thing like sits and glows, but not really doing it for me. Next we've got the Silver Hand. Yeah, this is very, very cool. It's going to be used by the Holy Paladins. And I've got to say, this first, just main version of it, it looks imposing. It looks almost too dangerous to be holy, but I think it's a very evocative and strong looking weapon. Now, this animated version is once again looking pretty damn nice. I always like a glow in a weapon. I think it makes it a bit more visually interesting from time to time. Some very solid color variations as well. This will definitely go with quite a few things. You even got a purple one, which might go with some of your more crystalline transmogs. Now, this one is on fire, and I think it is extremely cool looking. If you are going for a fire paladin, maybe using some of that Firelands gear, then this is going to look super strong. Next, we've got this purple version. Now, this is strange. It's not really doing as much for me because it's a little bit more muted. It's kind of less out there, but it is still a very, very big hammer, and I think a lot of people like the idea of just a very, very big hammer. Again, though, even with the recolors, it just doesn't have the vibrancy to do it for me. This version, however, is extremely cool. I'm absolutely digging how it's got this massive big head on it, a fist in the middle. It looks really strong, really powerful, really imposing, and it's definitely got a very strong silhouette, which I absolutely like. Of course, it's holy, so it's going to come with a holy book. The holy book is looking pretty great. And as far as I'm concerned, I like the idea of maybe this being slung on your belt if you've got your stuff sheathed. Some pretty nice recolors as well. We don't know if there are going to be other holy books for the other variants of the Silver Hand, but hey, we'll find out eventually. Next up, Prot, and I think Prot Paladins have actually got some of the strongest choice of any spec out there. This first version of the Truthguard shield is looking immense. Not only is it massive, but I think it's got some really beautiful animated effects to sort of bring it to life a little bit, especially that golden sort of holy looking variant. Again, this one is rather similar to the last one in its overall style. It just has more animations, more color, and overall just a little bit more going on. Once again, I think it's absolutely wonderful looking, and you can definitely see a lot of the Titanic influence in these paladin weapons, or shields. Of course, shields aren't exactly weapons. So yeah, once again, extremely strong, and I love how there's this rotating, pulsing thing in the middle. This perhaps looks a little bit more like a traditional shield, which is great because, well, not everybody likes their sort of super glowy swag thing. It does have a rotating thing in the middle, which looks quite good. This doesn't do as much for me as the other ones, but it's still an extremely cool looking shield. Now, this version of Truthguard is more crystalline, so there are definitely going to be some mogs which will look good with that crystalline theme, some of the Warlord stuff, especially when you've got the purple crystal one. That'll go with your kind of Draenei, narrowish sets, and perhaps even the red one might go with the odd firish set. Of course, every sword, well, every board has to come with a sword, and here's the sword that we're going to get. I think it's a beautiful weapon. It's not completely crazy and insane, but that's because it's not a dual-wielded weapon, it's not a two-hander, it's just a one-hander, especially that golden holy version. I think the Paladins just overall are doing so damn well. It's also nice that we've got so many different color variations of this weapon, so no matter what your transmog is, you're probably going to be able to find a variant of this that will suit your needs. That red one's actually particularly interesting. Yeah, I like how not only are they changing the color of the effects, but they're changing the color palette of pretty much every different bit of the weapon, so this is definitely going to go with a lot of stuff. What they've essentially done here is just made loads and loads of different swords, same silhouette. Yeah, same overall silhouette, but they're definitely doing a lot with the coloring. Overall, yep, I think Paladins have got some of the best stuff out there. Next up, we've got the Warriors, and this is Stromkar's something sword of the something, I forget the name exactly. So this particular variant here is not doing much for me at all. It looks very dull, very bland, and very washed out. This one, however, is a little bit more interesting. There is actually some color, and I think overall going through these arms warrior weapons, there isn't enough color for me, and I mean, this right now isn't doing much. Now this, I think, does look a lot better, but if you look at it, it looks more like a Death Knight rune blade than an arms warrior weapon. I suppose it's as if Blizzard are having a bit of trouble trying to find out what a warrior weapon looks like other than a big sword. I mean, this just looks quite generic to me, and I suppose in comparison to quite a few of the other artifacts, it's just not really doing a great deal, which is really sad. Now, this next one is actually a little bit more interesting. Why? Well, again, there's a bit more color, and I'm actually getting some sort of Lei Shen vibes off mainly the blue color variant. I think it's the best one of the bunch overall. Now, for the Fury Warriors, it's important to quickly note for you guys that these are going to be scaled up to be two-handers. Apparently, that's just a problem that they know is an issue and they want to fix. So that first variant, I think, is looking pretty good, actually. Bearing in mind these will be scaled up, of course. If you look at this, I think it's very rich, and that's what I really like about it. You've got kind of like a nice gold there. Moving on to this green variant again. It feels rich. I'm more a fan of the gold variant, though, than any of the others. I think it was particularly impressive looking. Now, this, again, looks like something that, well, the blue one looked like something a Frost DK would use. As for the rest of them, though, they just, again, don't look particularly impressive. I think in terms of them being scaled up, they'll also need to be lengthened. Now, this is totally doing something for me. It's kind of hard to see the particle effect here, but this will be a kind of a big, glowing sword. Going to look great in some transmogs, and just imagine holding two of these in red, like seeping blood everywhere. That could be super badass. This next one is pretty damn great. You almost have a gold version that looks a bit paladinish. The green one and the purple one again looking quite good. It's not blowing my mind though. Like, it's a really solid weapon, but I think I want more from the Fury stack. Now, for this Prot shield, again, not doing that much for me, and I feel bad for the warriors in a way. I think a lot of these shields are just pretty bland, pretty boring. These look like leveling shields in my eyes, and that really is disappointing to me. Now, I do know that there are some pretty cool ones here, but a lot of them aren't that great. This shield is particularly cool, and the reason why is because one of its color variants actually looks like it would match with the old Might set. I believe it's Might. Anyway, yes, this one. I think that's extremely cool and a lovely throwback, and it's a pretty cool shield itself. As for this one, I like skulls, I like bones, but again, it just doesn't feel like anything unique and special. It doesn't feel like it's got much of its own identity as a legendary weapon. It's a bit generic. Now, this weapon, or this shield here, has got a little bit more color to it. That's something that I do like. It almost looks a bit more elemental, a bit more Deathwing-ish, like it could have been coming from that particular tier, especially with the purple version and the orange one. This next one, again, pretty boring, and we're just moving on to the very few amount of data mined one-handed swords that we've got, which go with Prot. These all look extremely boring, and I would transmog away from every single one of them. Next up, we've got the Hunter, my main class, and I'm going to be starting off with Titan Strike for Beast Mastery. This first version of Titan Strike is pretty nice, but it's maybe not doing a lot for me. Why? Well, it just doesn't really strike or stand out that much, and it doesn't feel kind of naturalistic enough for Beast Mastery. This next gun, I think, is extremely badass. I don't think it's a Beast Mastery Hunter weapon, though. This looks like a marksman weapon, in all honesty. It's a feckin' sniper rifle. Honestly, for me in BM, I want more of a kind of rustic-looking blunderbuss than something like this, but absolutely, I think it is a very well-designed and very impressive-looking model that I do like. It's essentially the first version, but with a scope and a few things added onto it. This next one, I think, is really cool. First of all, it's one-handed, so I'm interested to see what the animations are going to be like for that, but it almost reminds me of those snub-nosed revolvers that have a bayonet on them that you kind of see from, like, the Old West. Whether they were actually a thing that much, I don't know, but this is very chunky, very cool looking, it's got some cool moving parts. I think it's a really nice artifact weapon. Now, this next one is pretty damn chunky, and that's really what I would have been wanting from the Beast Mastery stuff. It is made of metal, though. I would prefer something with a bit more of a wood feel to it. That's definitely true, but I think it's a pretty nice weapon. It looks powerful. It looks like a cannon. Look at the damn thing. Insane. Now, this thing, what is this? Is this like a dragon / crossbow that fires bullets? I don't even know, but bloody hell, it's cool and I want one. I just think this is a really unique, crazy-ass looking weapon, and I'm absolutely down with Blizzard throwing in something that's just a bit more unique, different, and experimental. Let's move on to marksmanship. So with marksmanship, we're going to be using bows. These are, I believe, the Windrunner family bows. Now, we're starting off here with some basic enough looking bows, but I think they're very, very well designed. They're pretty. They're very nice. We don't have the best camera angles here. Unfortunately, not everything is a 3D model, but I'm liking these decently enough, even though they are kind of understated. That said, for a bow, I do like a bow to really look like it is a bow. This next version, okay, it doesn't look like a bow, but it's very sleek, very slender, very dangerous looking, especially that absolutely gorgeous Blood Elf version, and I suppose the same for the purple version as well. Now, this is really impressive. It looks like a bird, which is a nice little throwback to the Hunters, although, of course, will not be using a pet. I think this, again, is just absolutely beautiful artistically. Strong colors and a very, very nice motion to it. And again, you see that same motion be applied to this crossbow, where the head of the bow is like a hawk or something. You've got a really cool Blood Elf version as well. What I like is that all the motion of their lines is going forward, and, you know, it makes sense because it's a projectile weapon. So we've got the Eagle Spear here. Now, this is going to be for survival, and one of the big things about survival is they're a melee class now. This first variant of it, I think, is pretty brilliant looking. This next one, I'm a little bit less keen on for some reason. I just don't think the extra stuff looks as good. The other one looked a little bit more simplistic and kind of... would earthy almost be the word? Not sure, but I still think both variants are very, very cool as far as the polearms go. This next one, though, I absolutely love. If you look at the head of the polearm, it's a wolf's head. That's extremely cool. I would love to see if this would maybe animate at the odd time. I don't know if the wolf would breathe something out, but I think it's an extremely cool looking weapon. As for this next one, well, it's a big blast of color, isn't it? And that's definitely nice. I'm not completely sold on the design overall, though. It looks a little bit just random, not really like it's got the best direction. I mean, the color's nice, but it's not doing much for me. This next one, I think, is pretty nice, but really it doesn't hold a patch on the first few. And one of the first few is probably what I'd personally be going for. Some of its color variants are quite nice, and I do like how it's got that kind of rustic feel to it, which is definitely quite nice. You know, it's a bit beaten, a little bit aged. That's good. So overall for the Hunters, I think we're looking pretty damn strong, even though I'm not 100% happy with Beast Mastery. Time to cover the Shamans, and we're going to be starting off with the Doomhammer. Of course, this first version is the basic Doomhammer. Obviously, they're not going to be changing it up to make it look different. Yeah, it looks like a standard kind of hammer thing, but it's an iconic weapon. I think it looks very cool, personally, and as much as it's questionable whether we should be having such an artifact be a thing that's in the hand of players, it's nice to see, at least. Now, this next one is a bit more of a spectacle. Of course, Shamans are all about the elements. This one is arcing lightning all over the place, looking very cool. The golden one almost looks holy, which is pretty damn nice, and the green one doesn't really look like nature energy. It looks like something kind of fell. I think this lightning version is extremely cool, though. Big fan of it. Now, this next one just doesn't really look like the Doomhammer to me, and I suppose as we move through the skins, we're going to see stuff like that happen. It's nice, it's pretty accomplished, it just doesn't really fulfill the enhancement, it doesn't fill the enhancement shaman kind of fantasy, in that it doesn't feel like this is what's used by somebody who's, you know, throwing fireballs, mixing that in with their melee strikes. This next version, however, absolutely fits the spec perfectly. Now, this is just the main hand version. In your offhand, it will spawn a kind of elemental, like, duplicate of the hammer, which will basically be like a pure fire version. They do look very cool. This is just like the main hand weapon model. This overall, the slaving version, I think, is looking absolutely brilliant. But speaking of absolutely brilliant, hats off to this. First of all, really cool animations and stuff going on, and this almost looks like it's something that would be used by a priest or a holy paladin, especially this gold and white version. So as much as it might not feel 100% shaman-y, I think it is one of the coolest one-handed maces in the game, based off what we can see so far. So next we move on to the Scepter of Ashara, which is the Restoration Shaman choice. This first version of it is simple enough looking. It's not particularly blowing me away. I like how it's kind of, in some ways, a little bit sleek, whatever, but not that special. This next one, though, is pretty cool. We've actually seen a gif of it from Blizzard, and it's all animated with the water effects, and I do hope those water effects kind of surge when you do a spell. That, I think, would look brilliant. This next version is also really quite nice looking. Again, it's a one-handed mace, so it's not going to look insane, or, you know, be crazy big, but I think it's a simple design that's well done with a nice kind of like light orb in the middle. This next version of it is a little bit more rustic looking. It's got horns, wood, tusks, things like that, and I think it would appeal a lot more to a horde player. Whereas the other one definitely is a bit more kind of elvish looking. This next one's a bit odd. It partially initially struck me as like a paladin hammer, which was kind of weird. This doesn't feel that shamany at all, so I'm not really sure what's going on. Now, this also is a combination of a one-handed mace and a shield, and you can see we've got some animated shields here. I do hope again that those shields will flare up when you cast a spell. That would look really nice. As for the other shield offerings though, I'm just not particularly convinced by them. A lot of them do look just rather mediocre, and I think there are probably better options when it comes to being able to transmog out of some of this stuff. Finally, for the Elemental Shaman, we've got the Fist of Raden. This is a pretty damn cool looking fist weapon, and it's going to be all kind of animated with the lightning effect you've got going on there. One odd thing though is, this is a spec that's hurling lava bolts and things. Does it make a lot of sense to be using a fist weapon like this? That kind of caught me by surprise. It's a fist weapon and shield combination, which is definitely a little bit more different and out there. And a lot of those fist weapons don't look particularly shamanistic. However, you've got this one here, which is very chunky. It's got like, the fire orb in the middle of it. That looks very shamanistic. I think that absolutely works. Though this next one, as an example, it just doesn't look like something that would be used by an elemental shaman. That said, I think it's very nice. I think these are all very, very nice fist weapons. They just don't particularly fit the class in a crazy way. And I mean, from a lore perspective, this could be me missing something out, but I don't even know how much Raden has got to do with elemental shamans. Now, on with the shields, again, what we're going to see with these is the shields are animated. That could look really, really cool if they do it right, especially if the animations tie in with your spellcasting. Next, we've got the Demon Hunter stuff. I've got to imagine this is a class of weapons that people are very interested in seeing. So this first one is really mundane. It looks like a leveling weapon. I've got to assume this is the first variation of it and that you'll be getting some more cool stuff. Now this one is upping the ante a little bit. It's got one edge which is tipped with some green stuff. Overall, yeah, looking really, really, really good. What's odd though is some of these look less interesting than the warglyphs that I've been using in the Demon Hunter starter zone, i.e. the starting weapons, which is a bit strange. This one is doing a lot more for me though. Why? Well, it's got more color. It's also got a handguard, which gives it a little bit more bulk to it. Some really nice looking particle effects that I think will look really great in motion, as in they'll kind of look like a motion trail, which could be nice. This next version is not really a warglaive, it's some teeth on a stick with a skull on it. I'm totally down with the skull. It actually looks like the skull is in armor. That's very badass. But the rest of it isn't really doing much for me. It just doesn't feel Demon Hunter-y, I suppose. Yeah, not the biggest fan. This almost looks like a shield in many ways, and I've got to wonder whether this will be what is worn by one hand of the tanking Demon Hunter. That said though, it's nice, it's bulky, lots of color to it, very strong overall. I think it's a good addition. Now this one is looking a bit more like a traditional warglaive in that it's, just a flat out simple glaive. Definitely looks quite nice. You've got a few colors there. One of them's got that Illidari kind of look to it. Some other ones. Again though, it's not particularly crazy. It almost looks like a starting weapon. This next version does not look like a starting weapon. I've got to assume this is an upgraded version that you maybe unlock at level 110. This looks a lot stronger, more color, some really nice lines, and I especially like how you've got demon's horns built into the weapon itself. This one, again, it almost looks like something a Blood Death Knight would be using if a Blood Death Knight was a demon hunter, in that it's got those kind of fell-looking lines. The green variation of it's particularly cool, and I've got to imagine that this will look better when it's fully animated. Of course, this is alpha/beta, so everything is subject to change. And speaking of things that will look better animated, we've got this one. Very cool though. The actual glaives themselves are just a particle effect, so this is, I'd say, going to look absolutely brilliant in motion, and that green variation is especially brilliant. And next we've got this. This looks very, I almost want to say it looks very 2007, and I mean that in a good way. I don't know, if you've looked at some of those older weapons, maybe you'll get what I mean. I think this is one of the strongest options, especially the green and purple variations. Overall, I think the Demon Hunters do have a very strong suite, though. Let's move on to the rogue, starting off with Assassination. And we've got a dagger that looks pretty okay. I mean, it's a dagger, it does stabbing, but in all honesty, that it's just not particularly impressing me that much. This next variant of it is a little bit better, and then it's got a bit of a glow, it's got something going on, but overall, I'm just not, I don't know, this dagger isn't particularly doing much for me. The only one that I will say worked pretty well, though, was the red one. Now, moving on to this next version of the dagger, a part of it almost looks Ashbringer-ish with that little sort of cutout that it's got. The one thing that is strange is that none of these are good at stabbing. Okay, maybe this next one here is good at stabbing, but the other ones are all very strange, like chopping daggers, which is a little bit odd. I think that red one does look particularly brutal, though. Overall, though, I'm just not feeling it for assassination. Like here, this one's just a bunch of bones. I can see some people thinking that maybe looks cool. I can see that working with a few very specific mogs. But overall, none of these assassination options are really particularly special for me. Let's move on to Outlaw, which is the new combat spec, and I've got to say, these Outlaw weapons are looking brilliant. The whole thing is designed around being a kind of pirate/bandit, and I think they've absolutely managed to deliver that fantasy with these weapons. One or two of them, I especially like how they're almost sort of gilded in a way. It almost has this kind of like Pirate King look, which I really think is particularly pleasing to the eye. Overall, some really, really nice work here. Also, this saber is actually quite unique. Like, if you compare this to the sabers, or I think it's a saber, whatever, if you compare it to the current version of that weapon that we've got in the game, what a massive improvement. I think Outlaw have actually got brilliant. Subtlety, however, are not so lucky. This is basically just a big tooth / bone or something, or a tusk, with a bit of, just slapped onto a bit of metal. That is not doing anything for me in the slightest. It just looks really boring. This next one is basically the same thing, but with a bunch of corruption on it, such that the corruption makes it very bad at being a knife. It doesn't look like anything. It looks rubbish, as far as I'm concerned. This next one is a little bit better. It's got a bit of a wispy sort of smoke effect on it, but it's still the same base weapon. This just doesn't feel inspired at all to me. It's very dull, very boring. This one, again, it's the same. It's a tusk or whatever, but this time they've sellotaped a blade onto it. Not looking that good for Blizzard. I'm honestly surprised that this is what they've managed to come up with. This one, again, it's just something stuffed onto a bone or a tusk. It looks a bit better because it's a bit more vibrant, but overall, I think Subtlety, actually overall as a spec, might be the worst off of the whole lot. Next, let's move on to Feral with the Fangs of Ashmane. Now, the Fangs of Ashmane are pretty cool looking, definitely, and you can see how it's kind of like a fang with a dagger built around it. I think that looks really cool. What is more cool about this, though, is that you're going to get a new Feral form. And I will cover that Feral form in this video because it is amazing looking. Now, the same goes for Guardian, but I think their actual weapon does look quite a bit better. And just very well colored, very well defined, and absolutely brilliant looking. Apparently, they're going to try to find a way for your forms to actually be wielding your weapon, but we haven't actually seen that yet, and we have no idea whether that will actually come to pass. So for Restoration, we've got a more traditional looking staff, and while I think this base version of it does look quite nice, for whatever reason, it's just not particularly impressing me to a great degree. Like, some of those color variations are definitely really pretty. I suppose I'm just not the biggest fan of some of the Druid stuff. That said, my own Druid is using the level 20 quest rewards. It's got animations. I think it's really nice. So this next version's got a little bit more going on. And in terms of animations, I've got to wonder whether we'll be seeing those sprouts and things on the top of it change a little bit. Right now, we have a little bit of motion and a bit of glow, but perhaps there could be more. And the same can be applied to this next version, which, at first glance, almost looks a little bit more like a paladin weapon, but if you look a little bit closer, you can see that it's actually feathers that are pulsing out. I think it's pretty nice looking overall. I like how there's a little bit more light going on. This one, though, is, I think, really strong, and a part of that for me is that it just has more lighting to it. I think that makes it look just a bit more visually rich, with very strong glow going throughout, and of course that strong glow means that its color variations all feel quite unique. I think that's a really solid option. Now, this one is rather samey-ish. I mean, yeah, it's a little bit bigger, a bit more impressive, but not really doing it for me. What is kind of cool is it almost looks like it's got some of the balance Druid, like the Moonkin form armor on it at parts. That is a nice little touch, but again, this isn't particularly exciting me that much. However, when we move on to this next weapon, the Scythe of Elune, I'm far more impressed. I really like scythes. as already been established in this video, I think this is a particularly strong scythe with some excellent different versions for the colors. It's going to look great in Balanced Druids, I think, and of course the scythe almost looks like the crescent part of a moon. This next version of the Scythe the Loon is pretty similar. It's got a little bit of a different thing at the back, I think. Overall, like, yeah, it's pretty good. Maybe I just kind of look for something that's going a little bit more crazy than the original version of the Scythe. So this version has actually done that, and it's basically put a crescent moon on a staff. I think that looks really, really cool. Absolutely fits the lore and the fantasy of the balanced spec. So absolutely an extremely strong option with some beautiful color variations. And of course we have this one. Now this is cool in that the scythe itself is a bit more ethereal, a bit more dusty looking. If you look closely at it, it doesn't actually look like it's got a solid core, it's more just a big particle effect. That is particularly nice, and I've got to imagine that in motion when you're running around with this thing glowing in your character, that it's going to look extremely impressive. And finally we've got this version of the scythe, which, I don't know, it's a little bit more kind of savage looking in that it's got loads of like sort of fangs on it, and that is kind of cool, though it doesn't look like the Scythe of a Loon. At this point it's completely disappeared from its fantasy, which is a little bit of a pity. It almost just looks a little bit too dark for what a Balanced Druid in my head is. Let's hop over to the Monk, starting off with Mistweaver. Now this very first Mistweaver one I think is very nice. A little bit washed out in the colours with that first variant, but there are some nice rich ones like the kind of gold and jade one, which I think are really appealing. I like how it's got the bell there, and it's got that kind of like beautiful long rope scroll thingy coming down from it. I think it's really nice, and again, this is a more I'd just say a more like sort of built up version of that same staff, and I especially do like the gold and jade one. Blizzard are very good at doing that Pandaren aesthetic, especially kind of the Jade Forest look. I think it does look very good, and it stands out with some weapons like this. Overall, yeah, I think it's really, really pretty nice looking. This next one is, okay, in this color variation, not great, but I do like how they've got a little pot of incense there, and how that pot of incense seems to have active physics on it. Of course, the Jade and Gold one is the one that looks the best, because I think it's really it's the color palette that suits that art style the best overall, but still, a very, very cool variation. This next one is more Sha themed. Honestly, I'm just not that excited about stuff that's themed in the Sha anymore. We've had Mists of Pandaria dealing with Sha stuff. I've seen enough of it. I mean, it's great to have it as an option, but personally, it just isn't really that exciting. Next, we've got this one based off Shiji, and I think it's absolutely fantastic looking, and I really like how they've got the little wind chimes coming off the crane's mouth. Yeah, this might be one of the most kind of like just sleek, slender, beautiful, nice looking staffs that they've got, especially that kind of more rich red version. I think it's really, really nice looking. Next, we've got Windwalker. Now, Windwalker are going to be using fist weapons. This very first fist weapon, I think, is looking really, really great. Lots of very different color variations, and I especially do like that gold and white, with a little dash of black thrown in there, as well as that, yeah, sort of next variation of that color palette. You've also got this version with a bit of a different looking blade. I think these are all looking great, and yeah, it's just nice for Mistweaver to be using a weapon like this. I think in action, you know, that animated on their fists while they do their attacks will look really good. This next one, it actually caught me off as being like a miniature Frostmourne for a second, but it's more of a crystalline and vibrant look. Very strong colors, like it's very, very noticeable, which is definitely good. I like that in my gear. I know some people might think it's clown gear, but I think it's a nice little option. This next one is more of a claw, and what I like here is that you've got something that's a claw shape, you've got a big crystalline thing, then you've got more of a knuckle duster look. There's quite a bit of variation with these hand weapons. That's definitely very good to see. Now, this one is just a bit mental. It's basically a big stone fist. This would go really well, I imagine anyway, with some of that Warlords of Draenor monk tier, the one with the big stone shoulders. Overall, very cool stuff for Windwalker. And finally, we've got Brewmaster. Now, this Brewmaster one is pretty much just the tankard kind of lashed onto a stick in that very, I almost want to say, traditional looking, style, having a bamboo rod. I think it's very nice. Is it the most flamboyant, like, crazy thing ever? No, but it definitely works. This upgraded version is similar to the last one, but it's got a bigger keg. That's pretty much only a good thing. A bigger keg? Definitely good. And I think it does look nice. It's chunky, it sort of fits with Brewmaster, I feel. It definitely looks like something you could defend yourself with. This next one is really cool. In most of its variants, actually, they're all quite nice for different reasons. You've got a metal kind of pot instead of a keg. That's really cool looking, and a dragon's head for the end of the staff. Absolutely brilliant stuff. The same goes for this next one, which has got a very different looking keg as well, and a body that's a lot more, I think, heavy and metallic looking. So overall, we see pretty good variations so far, and they've managed to do different things with the same base style. As for this one, I don't even know what's supposed to be in that. Is this sponsored by Monster Energy or something? I mean, half of Legion already is, I suppose. So this is, I mean, it's interesting, it's a bit vibrant, a little bit odd looking, doesn't really look that monkish, but I suppose it's good to have the variation. Next up, Warlocks, and I've got to say already from looking at these, Warlocks are in for such a treat. This first variation is a very solid looking scythe. I already like scythes, I think the balanced druid part of the video already established that. Yeah, this looks brilliant. Now, when we move into this variation, it's got a little bit more in terms of the spell effects. It's not as strong as one of the versions, though, and I'm just waiting for that to appear in the video so I can kind of geek out over it. But overall, this is a very, very nice-looking weapon with some strong colors. I like the skull on it, and yeah, it's pretty damn good. This version is pretty damn similar to the last one, but if you look closely at it, what you can see is the body of the scythe is more of a traditional scythe. It's quite smooth-looking, and I think this does look great. It's got a bit more in terms of, like, it's got a very strong effect on it. Very good colors. This one, however, is a little bit different, a bit more straight, a bit more, I think, savage and painful looking, which I definitely like because we are talking about an Affliction Warlock. It's pulsating with, like, plague and corruption and stuff. All fits Affliction really damn well. This next version is actually very big as far as scythes go, which, I don't know, for some reason it almost caught me off by surprise. I think it's that the top of it almost looks like it could be a hammer without the scythe bit. Still though, I think it's pretty big, pretty impressive looking. Overall, I'm a pretty big fan. Next, we're moving on to Destruction. Destruction's got a staff called the Scepter of Sargeras, I believe, and this first variation of it is just coming out, you know, fists rolling, really cool looking. That green one, which is now passed, especially nice, and I just love the entire head of this weapon. It's very, very cool looking with great animations. This is a version that's pretty damn similar to it, but if you just look at that spell effect, it sprouts wings. And that looks especially cool in this green variation. I think this might be one of the coolest weapons that they've actually brought out overall. The purple one looks very traditional Warlock. You know what, the Demonology Warlocks are just going to look at that and be a little bit sad because they've lost their meta. But overall, extremely cool looking. If you look at that ball in the middle, I love how that's pulsating and moving around. Overall, just what an amazing bit of weapon design. I'm extremely happy with this. This one is perhaps not going to be immediately as crazy because it doesn't sprout feckin' wings, but I still think it's beautiful looking. So first of all, you see a skull in the middle just above the hand, and that moves on to this like three-pointed thing with like an energy ball in the middle, and then some really cool runic text. This is wonderful looking. Again, like all the other Warlock weapons, extremely impressive. We're moving on to this version, which again is a bit more corrupted looking. It's got kind of like spider's legs going on with it, so if you were a fan of some of that 5.4 aesthetic with the Mop Shah, then maybe you'll like this. Overall, though, it is quite strong, just not doing as much for me as the other ones. Though what I do like is that its energy ball is quite a bit bigger than the other ones. It definitely stands out a lot. This one is extremely cool. It's got a rotating thingy in it, which, I mean, come on, rotating thingies, I'm sold. Looking at the top, very strong kind of color with its ball. It's got some nice runes on it, very cool bottom as well. Overall, just another extremely impressive looking weapon. As far as these animated Warlock weapons go, I think they are just looking absolutely insanely good. Warlocks have came off extremely well. Next, it's time to cover Demonology, and I've got to say, Demonology Warlocks might be the best off in terms of artifact weapons, because boy have they got something unique. This doesn't really fit any weapon slot that we have. It is like a floating demon skull that floats in and around your character. I think it looks absolutely wonderful, and especially this first variant's nice with its big metallic jaw. This next one, a jawless skull floating in the air, very strong colors, very vibrant, looks very evil. And Blizzard's detailing work on the skulls is also brilliant. They definitely do look very striking. They really stand out. That's absolutely a good thing. I'm actually just really impressed. And this one, a bit of a disconnected jaw, kind of a more fell look in its interior. It just surprises me, and I think it's definitely very, heartening to see that they've went and they've kind of, I suppose, innovated with a weapon. They've done something which isn't one of the traditional weapon types, something that's just floating around beside your character, because if you think about how a Demonology Warlock's going to be in Legion, they're less about firing things off their enemies, they're far more about summoning demons, and I think this skull definitely works. This one, is this a troll skull or an orc skull? One of the two, but again, it's looking quite good, and I like the way they're using that glowing effect, and the sort of stroke that you see in the outlines of the model. This next one is pretty cool in that it looks like the top of the skull is all fractured. Hopefully that's going to have some sort of animation effect. Overall though, Demonology, just wow, they have absolutely lucked out and got themselves a brilliant set of gear. Next, we're going to run through the priest, starting off with Holy, and first of all, you can see a pretty strong Naru influence with this staff. And if you look at the staff itself, it is big! Like, this staff isn't fecking around, it's a really, really big staff. It's also got a pretty good amount of motion, and some pretty strong colours in the bottom and the top, though perhaps the actual staff bit is a little bit weaker. This next one is pretty similar to the last staff, but you can see some more moving elements to it, more animation, a bit more flair, and especially in that Naru sort of purple look, the crystalline thing, very much associated with the Draenei, looking absolutely stunning. Yeah, the priests, so far for Holy anyway, are really coming off very well indeed. Now this next one is perhaps a little bit more standard and priestly, you could say, in that it's got, a bit of a white light, not really Naru based, more kind of, I suppose, a Stormwind human look to it in many ways. Yeah, it's pretty cool looking. For me personally, not as good as the Naru stuff, but if you actually look at that gold, white and black one, I think that really is a standout from the crowd. This one isn't doing it as much for me, though I think it's still an extremely strong weapon. It's more that the other competition is just so very strong. Especially if you look at the head of this, you've got the nice vibrant crystal then surrounded by some really, really nice looking spell effects. It's just amazing how they've got so many great looking things for Holy. This one, though, isn't really doing it for me. The reason why is because, well, it looks dark, shadowy, not really something that would be used by a Holy priest. It just doesn't seem to fit the style. Still, as a spec, Holy are really brilliantly done by so far. So for Discipline, we start off with this, which is again more of a traditional kind of Stormwind human-styled staff. My one criticism of it so far, though, is that its color palette is rather washed out. Yes, you've got a gold and a white and a black in there, but they're very muted. And if you look at this one, actually, it's a little bit more cool because it's quite literally got stained glass built into its body. Not sure if that's the most sound design for a weapon, but at least it looks cool, and I suppose when it comes to games, the rule of cool is pretty powerful. This next one is, I think, pretty mediocre for its body, but what is interesting that it's got these 3 burning candles, and it's nice how with most of these staffs they've tried to work in some details which I think, really fit. And both fit Holy and, in this case, Disc very well. And speaking of things that fit Disc very well, this has got a Holy book on the front of the staff. Really wonderful looking. And it's nice you've got a few little physics elements going on there as well. I think this is going to go great with some Mogs too. And overall with the Discipline guys, and again you see it in this, it's got a really impressive head to the staff, but the colours are just a little bit washed out. And I suppose some of that does work with the maybe the appeal and the look of Discipline if it was to have a look, but I still think some of the bodies are a bit bland. Finally, for the priest, we move on to Shadow. Now, Shadow is a bit different. Instead of a staff, it's got a melee weapon. Of course, they're not going to be actually doing melee, they're still casters, but this is mainly to reflect their Old God revamp in terms of their lore, especially if you look at this version of it, very much Old God inspired. Do I like it? Mostly. What I think is good is that it looks very sharp and very slicey, very vicious, very painful. That definitely works. And if you look at the handle of this, it's got 3 nails driven through it. I think that's a very powerful look. This next one, you can see the at least the sort of telltale signs of some animated effects on the actual blade there. And again, if you look at all these, they are slicing blades. They've got very long, sort of curved, curved elements to them. That's great. Again, it just feels clinical, it feels very cultish, like slicing off meat or something. I think the Shadow Priest stuff's definitely looking pretty good, but what will be the true test is what they look like once the Shadow Priest is actually in Void form and casting abilities. Next up, we have the mages, starting off with Arcane. I've got to say, Arcane are brilliant in terms of their weapons. This first one looking really cool. You've got three big, crystalline things, and this spinny circle in the middle and a strong sort of collar at the very bottom, or the foot of the staff. Looks excellent, though some of these actually look a little bit more priestly. You're kind of verging into that priest color scheme with the whites and the stuff like that. Now, if you thought the last staff was sort of crazy looking, this one is insane, and you're going to have you're going to have really sore wrists if you hold this. The momentum that must be going on with all the things gyrating about the place. I suppose if you're a mage, that's not really your biggest concern. But again, though, this looks brilliant. I really like this set. Or piece of gear, anyway. This next one, a little bit less hot on it. It kind of looks a bit Lei Shenish because of that thunder. It's pretty decent, though. It is a good staff. It's just that it doesn't look super impressive in comparison to the other ones because they are so very good. Which is absolute testament to how good those pieces of gear actually are. This one doesn't really work for me with Arcane, though. It looks a bit more kind of corrupted. It doesn't really look like Arcane magic, which surely is just about actual just raw power, raw energy. Not really a sort of super corrupting look. I mean, yeah, there's magic corruption as a plot of lore, but it just doesn't look like this staff is really channeling that quite well. I don't know, not 100% keen on it. This one, though, It's funny, it's looking quite priestly. If you look at the color scheme, it's got a kind of gold aura around it. That's absolutely something that's usually the domain of priests, especially if you look at this golden variation. That said, I don't think it looks like Arcane. I think it does look like a very, very nice staff. Next, we move on to Frost, who are going to be using Ebon Chill. I think this is a really, really nice looking staff. Again, Blizzard are very good at making staffs overall. They've, I guess, got a lot of room to do really interesting, creative things with them. Certainly in this, you've got a very nice head to it. And if you look at this, which appears to be the upgraded version of this weapon, it's looking quite brilliant. A lot of heft to it, though. A lot of heft, a lot of weight. But it's chunky, it fits the Warcraft universe. And once again, there's a purple version, which really looks like it should be wielded by Velen or somebody, and not exactly a mage. This next version is doing a little bit less for me in some ways, but there are some nice details. If you look at it, you can see there's actually a dagger in the bottom of it that you could sort of, draw in a sketchy situation, and it still does have a pretty strong head to it as well with that nice big crystal. This one, however, is kind of crazy looking. It's particle effects all over the place, which I love in weapons. I know that I like the things that are a bit more vibrant and crazy and kind of out there, but, this isn't going to not get your attention. I mean, look at this. It's blue, yet it's on fire. Very nice. This is a weird one. It looks like it's got loads of flubbers inside it, as if Blizzard tried to make a water staff, but they just couldn't really pull off the water rendering with their engine. I don't really think I think it looks a bit ridiculous, honestly. I get what they're going for, but I think it looks silly. And finally, we have Philomilorn, which is the Fire Mage weapon. Now, this has got a kind of Blood Elf sort of dynasty to it. It's the Sunstrider family blade. So when you look at it, it's got that kind of sleekness and that elegance and that beauty to it that really does complement them as a race. I think it's a really, really nice looking weapon. Pity you're not going to be hitting things with it, but hey, still, a very, very nice one, especially those really rich reds and oranges that are present in some of them. This next one is a bit more, I guess off the chains. It's as if it's kind of exploded. It's not doing as much, really, for me. As far as fire goes, I was a bit more of a fan of the past ones. I mean, these are interesting, but not really the biggest fan. And this next variant looks like more of a chopping weapon. Not really the kind of thing that would be used by a mage. Maybe something that you would have seen, with a Fury Warrior back in the times before Titan's Grip was actually a thing. This final one, again, doesn't really look like a mage's blade. It looks like something they just stole out of Mogushan Vaults. A little bit disconcerted in some of the last few options, but most of the versions of Philomilorn are looking brilliant. So there you have it, a look at just about every artifact weapon. More stuff will probably be data mined as time goes on. We'll get some more clean previews of things. Overall, I think most classes fare pretty well. There are a few outliers, though. I think warriors are pretty weak. I think rogues are pretty weak as well. Hopefully Blizzard are going to address that, and maybe we'll see more in the way of skin variations. So let me know what you think about your class down in the comments of the video. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and I will see you next time.